So what the Republic turns into for a good while here is an extended treatise on the philosophy of education. That is, the education of this guardian class, and a lot about poetry and what poetry these young people should be exposed to, and what poetry they should not be exposed to. And there is a lot of talk about Plato's Republic in terms of censorship and banishing the poets and everything like that, and that's definitely a part of the book and a controversial part of the Republic. I don't think it'll be that much part of our discussion considering our focus, but you do get a philosophy of education here, and you get a real notion of what the Greeks thought education was for, and the importance of poetry in Greek education. Poetry is huge in ancient Greece. I mean, great poets were like rock stars, and they were the educators too. There weren't that many books to read in ancient Greece, and what books there were for a long time were books of poetry. So poets were not only entertainers or artists, but also educators. They were kind of philosophers in themselves. In any case, we find out what all this attention is for, why he's so obsessed with what these young people should be exposed to, because of what education is for. And education is not getting information or learning about the world primarily. Education is the shaping of the individual, his personality, her soul, etc. And the balancing between different influences is very important, especially for these guardians. And there's a balancing not only sort of intellectually, but between the two parts of the soul that Socrates identifies. That is, there should be enough musical training, that is, training in poetry and music, to make the soul gentle, but there should be enough physical training to make the soul savage enough that the person can be good at being a soldier. If you look at page 94, towards the bottom, Socrates says, and surely the savageness derives from the spirited element of their nature, and that spirited element will reemerge, which, if rightly nurtured, becomes courageous, but if overstrained, is likely to become hard and harsh. So it seems. What about the cultivation? Wouldn't it derive from the philosophical element of their nature? And that philosophical element will reemerge too later, which, if relaxed too much, becomes softer than it should, but if well nurtured, is cultivated and orderly. That's right. Now, we said that our guardians must have both these natures. That is, because they must be able to be gentle with their fellow citizens and savage with enemies. Yes, they must. And mustn't the two be harmonized with one another? Okay, so that's really the notion of education for everyone, I guess, not just the guardians, that the goal of education is to have a harmonized soul. So we get to the end of this process, we find out sort of what the social structure of the city is after all this is done, and that really begins on page 96. Socrates says, all right, now what is the next question we have to settle? Isn't it which of these same people will rule and which will be ruled? Now it's not clear exactly what he's talking about there in terms of like the ruling and being ruled, whether he means the city as a whole or the guardian class in particular. And then he goes on to say, well, isn't it clear that the older ones must rule, whereas the younger ones must be ruled? Yes, it is clear, and that the rulers must be the best among them. And it becomes clear that he's talking about the guardian class, not talking about the city as a whole, which will turn out to be ruled by the guardian class as a whole. He's talking about the guardian class itself, and he seems to be dividing that class up. He says about the middle of page 97, then we must choose from among our guardians the sort of men who seem, on the basis of our observations, to be most inclined throughout their lives to do what they believe to be advantageous for the city, and most unwilling to do the opposite. So he's sort of taking out the best of the guardian class and creating a new class. And really, so we have two classes now. Well, we've divided the guardian class. Page 99, next to letter B in the margin towards the top, Socrates says, then wouldn't it really be most correct to call these people, the top people, complete guardians, the ones who guard against external enemies and internal friends, so that the former will lack the power and the latter the desire to do any evil. But to call the young people, to whom we were referring as guardians just now, auxiliaries and supporters of the guardian's convictions. So now we have two classes. We had one before. We have the guardians, who are the top, and then we have the auxiliaries, who are the secondary guardians. So what about the city as a whole? What is that? How does then the social structure of the city shape up? Take a look at the diagram that I put in there, the social structure of the republic, and it should become clear that there are three classes in the city. And Socrates says, let's tell the people a useful lie, a noble lie. That's what's referred to page 99 next to letter C, the useful lie, the single noble lie. And what is the lie that will tell the people of the city? That is outlined on page 100 next to margin number 415A. Socrates says, this is what we'll tell them. Although all of you in the city are brothers, we will say to them in telling our story, when the god was forming you, he mixed gold into those who are capable of ruling, which is why they are the most honorable, silver into the auxiliaries, and iron and bronze into the farmers and other craftsmen. So, just like the Olympics, we have stratification here. We have the gold, we have the silver, we have the bronze. The gold people will say, you sprung up out of the earth with gold in you, so you're a guardian. The silver people will say, you sprung up with that metal in you, so you're an auxiliary. And the bronze people, well, you've got bronze in you, so it's basically an ordinary person. You work, you live your life, you make money. But we got this definite class structure of the guardians at the top, the gold, the auxiliaries in the middle, the silver, and everyone else, which would be the large majority of people, the bronze. And I'm going to call them the money makers, because I think I'm relying on a previous translation. But so we've got our three-part class structure, and the idea is that every one of these classes does a certain job. And Socrates has sort of led us by the nose to see how these classes emerge naturally, according to which, or they're chosen according to their natures and who's best suited. The gold people, the guardians, they lead, they make the decisions, they govern. The auxiliaries fight and support the guardians. And what do these gold people do? Well, they work and they live ordinary lives. But as we see, they can have as much property as they want, but that they won't rule. And one could say that their civic duty is to obey the guardians. But what's most important now is that now we have our class structure. We have our three-part class structure. And in Book 4, we'll see that this structure is very crucial because it's the basis of the theory of human nature that is outlined in Book 4.